Thank you for being here. Welcome to Long Trail School. My name is Colin Igoe. I'm the head of school here at LTS. Thanks for being with us tonight, and thank you to GNAT for recording the event for anyone who's unable to be here. At Long Trail School, we value civic engagement. In the classroom and co-curricular activities, students have opportunities to engage in a wide variety of activities and tasks, demonstrating what it means to be an informed, responsible citizen, both at school and in the greater community. Tonight is the first in what we hope will be a continuing series of opportunities for civil discourse, where we invite folks to LTS for community discussions on a range of important topics. And with an election less than a month away, and true threats to school choice in our educational system, this is a pertinent and pressing topic for our community and for our elected officials. We value the open exchange of ideas. In our classrooms at Long Trail, we don't teach students what to think, we teach them how to think. With that comes the obligation to present and defend one's ideas while being open-minded to the viewpoints of others. Unfortunately, civil discourse seems to be in short supply these days. Nationally, we see a trend toward divisive, hollow exchanges as opposed to thoughtful, informed discussion. As educators, we must push back on this trend. We teach students how to use their minds well, to present ideas clearly, supported by evidence, and to listen carefully. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity tonight for two candidates for state representative to model what effective discussion looks like about this important topic. And regardless of what may happen beyond our campus, I'm grateful to work in a school and live in a community where we model civility and respect. And we're fortunate to have a direct connection to the folks who will be representing all of us in Montpelier. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Mike. And finally, I'm grateful to live in a community that values education. The cornerstone of an effective democracy is an educated citizenry. So in addition to Mike, Sandy, and Oliver, thank you for all being here tonight. Democracy doesn't happen if folks don't show up. Thanks for attending and engaging in this community conversation about a topic of the utmost importance. So again, thank you, Oliver, Mike, and Sandy, and please join me in welcoming, please join me in welcoming our moderator for tonight's discussion, Hannah Corker.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to echo Colin's welcome and extend an additional thank you to our guests who are joining us this evening. It is my pleasure, as your moderator, to introduce you to our panelists. You just met Colin Igoe, our head of school at Long Trail. Thank you again for all your efforts in making this happen. We have Sandy Pinsonault, Dorset's town clerk and the Republican nominee for state representative. Oliver Olsen, a current Long Trail parent, advisor to the Vermont Independent Schools Association, former state representative, and former chair of the State Board of Education. Anything else you want to add? And last but certainly not least, Mike Rice, state representative for the Bennington-Rutland House District and Democratic nominee for re-election. We are thrilled to have you here. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you need to use the restroom, they are located down the hallway here to the right. And please take a moment now to silence or turn off your cell phones. We can follow instructions. Thank you, thank you. Now please join me in welcoming Oliver Olsen to the podium, who will provide us with a brief background of Vermont education and school choice.
Great. Thank you all for coming out this evening and participating in this really important discussion. So, as I mentioned, I served in the legislature for a number of years and also had the privilege of serving on the State Board of Education. So, I've been very close to education, both at a local level and at a statewide level. And on a personal note, I just want to take a moment to to remember Dave Wilson, who sadly passed away this year. Dave Wilson, as you all know, was one of the founders, along with Rini, of Long Trail School back in 1975. And also, for a number of years, served as the president of the Vermont Independent Schools Association, and was a tireless advocate for education in general, and specifically the unique opportunities that we have in our local community to access independent as well as public schools. So with that, a little bit of history. I really first, I actually had the experience of attending Long Trail for a couple of years, many years ago, a few decades ago. And one memory that always stuck with me was morning meeting. This would have been around 1990, if I had to guess. Long Trail was a bit smaller, and morning meeting was quite a bit smaller as well. But I remember Dave Wilson talking about how he was going up to the legislature to testify on some legislation that was squarely aimed at independent schools like Long Trail. And I tell that story because we have this tradition of independent schools across Vermont, and particularly in our region and up in the Northeast Kingdom, that have been under attack for many years, literally decades. And these things tend to ebb and flow, so that things flare up and then they die away. They're quiet for a while. Yeah, everything is fine. We never hear anything about it again, and then it inevitably crops up again. And that's been my experience and my observation over many decades now. But as I mentioned, Long Trail was founded in 1975. It became part of what has really been this amazing educational ecosystem in this region. And I also want to acknowledge, I see Seth Bongartz in the audience. I had the privilege of serving with Seth on the Burr & Burton Board of Trustees for a number of years. And Seth always remarked, as the chair, he served as the chair of the Board of Trustees at BBA, he always remarked that what really made Burr & Burton a good school was its independence. What made Burr & Burton a great school was Long Trail. And it was the ability that kids could choose from more than one option that really brought out the best in all schools that our kids have access to. But make no mistake about it, these unique opportunities that we have in our community, that other communities have in other parts of the state, and I would point out rural parts of the state, are very much under attack and are on the ballot this year. And we find ourselves sort of in the middle of sort of a national war, if you will. And what we have, on one hand, we have the opponents of school choice, both at the national level and at the state level, who have always opposed school choice, always opposed access to independent schools. And they have for many years, many decades, nothing new. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have these national sort of right-wing organizations that are trying to promote a version of school choice that we don't actually have in Vermont, but they're filing various lawsuits. They're sort of really sticking, sticking people in the eye with sort of their objectives, and they're providing sort of this fodder for the traditional sort of opponents to school choice to leverage in these battles, and we're sort of caught in the middle of this. We know how to do school choice right in Vermont. We have a rich variety of independent schools that provide great opportunities and are committed to fundamental principles of anti-discriminatory practices, welcoming inclusion, and
unfortunately, there are there's some bad actors out there, and these sort of national organizations have put them on a pedestal, and we're dealing with that up in Montpelier. So, last year, there were several pieces of legislation that were introduced in both the House and the Senate that essentially, to make it really simple, would have eliminated school choice as we know it and would have required students in communities like ours to only attend public schools or one of the historic academies, such as, there's only 4 of them, Burton, St. Johnsbury Academy, Linden Institute, and Thetford Academy. So school choice as we know it, access to schools like Long Trail would no longer exist. Fortunately, we had some really strong support in the Senate. A number of senators with incredible tenure in history and appreciation and understanding of sort of the unique system that we have. They really ensured that those bills did not move forward. Unfortunately, sadly, through a combination of some retirements and in the case of Senator Dick Sears, his passing this year, we've lost a lot of that voice in the Senate, and we're going to see a lot of this pressure that's been building up over the last couple of years in both the House and the Senate, take shape again. And there's going to be a lot of momentum and a lot of pressure to move some of this legislation forward. So it's, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be an uphill battle to maintain what we have, because on one hand we have these sort of national right-wing organizations filing legislation. On the other hand, we have the opponents of school choice who are sort of almost egging that on because they see that as an opportunity to promote their own cause by pointing out some of that litigation. So we're really stuck in the middle, and a big part of what we're going to have to do as a larger community is to start to tell a story of what independent schools in Vermont are really about. One of the things, words matter, and our opponents, they label independent schools as private schools, right? So anytime you hear the word private school, that is, that's a sure sign of some bias that you're hearing. Independent schools in Vermont are independent. That's how we're defined in statute and rules. That's what independent schools call themselves. The opponents like to, fix that private school label on us because it conjures up this image of elitism, exclusivity, and it plays into, into their whole narrative. So 5% of Vermont kids are accessing independent schools through school choice. It's a very small number out there. And because of that, there's roughly 95% of Vermonters who don't really understand our system. And when you're hearing a narrative that's being, pushed by, those who would like to take the system away, who are well-funded, I would point out, the message gets lost. So a big part of, what we need to be doing as a community is, is having conversations like this and starting with, having awareness within the community about the very serious threats that we're facing. So I'll end there, I think. Thanks.
Oliver, thank you for providing us with that valuable background and context for tonight's discussion. We're all excited to engage in a meaningful conversation around this very, very important topic. This is not a debate, but an opportunity to share perspectives and viewpoints on school choice and the future of education in Vermont. I have some prepared questions to help guide our discussion and encourage thoughtful dialogue. But before so, I would like to provide an opportunity for Sandy and Mike to introduce themselves and give a little bit about your viewpoint. Sandy, I'll welcome you to start.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here tonight. I am Sandy, and I am a product of school choice, as my children are a product of school choice as well. Governor Scott is pro-choice, school choice, pro-school choice, I should say, and that as well. And I am quite sure that the Republican Party is also a school choice, in favor of school choice. I don't know of any Republican legislature in the past, since Act 60 or even before, that has ever introduced a bill to abolish or eliminate school choice. And I am a true believer that it's a parent's right to make that choice and what fits each student, an individual student. As a town clerk, I have had many people come into my office that are new to town, and that's one of the first questions I ask is, what brought you here? And inevitably, it's our schools. And our schools sell real estate, whether people realize that or not. And so it brings people here because we do have school choice. And very often I'll always ask, because I am an alum of BBA, I kind of favor BBA.
This has been good, Sandy.
But I always ask, where are your children going to go to school? And sometimes they'll tell me, well, I've got one going to go to Long Trail, and I've got one going to go to Dorset, and my daughter has chosen to go to Burr. So they, as a family, can choose, and they pick what suits each student the best. So I am absolutely in favor of school choice.
Testing.
Is the green light on?
Now it is. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Mike Rice, State Representative for the Bennington-Rutland District, which includes Dorset, Peru, and Landgrove in Bennington County, and Danby, Mount Tabor in Rutland County. And, you know, one thing I like to say on this topic is that unlike Sandy and Oliver and perhaps many of you in the room, I didn't grow up here. I didn't go to BBA or Long Trail. I grew up over in upstate New York and moved here as an adult. And so I've had to learn what this system is, how these schools serve these communities, what it all means, right? I came in not knowing, not understanding. And what I've learned is how well the system serves kids here and serves families here and communities. So I think it's really important, you know, as Oliver started, you know, in his overview, to separate the national conversation and the conversation we have here in Vermont and here specifically in our community about school choice. Very different things. You know, worlds different conversations. And yeah, what I have learned over my years here, you know, before being elected and certainly serving as the representative for families in these towns is that this system works. It serves our kids well. It serves our communities well, and it's something we should all be helping to educate my colleagues, our neighbors from other parts of Vermont, and defending here at home.
Thank you both. Shall I get started? Okay, my first question is, Sandy, I'll ask you to answer first. At the 2023 annual meeting, voters in the Taconic and Green School District overwhelmingly supported school choice by a margin of 93%. If elected, how will you represent your constituents on this issue in Montpelier?
Well, I think the 93% is an overwhelming support, and I have no problem being out on the floor of the State House and advocating for those school choices and not being passively letting my party decide for me. I think I will be standing up there saying, no, this is not good for my constituents, and therefore I vote in favor of school choice.
I think that I would take an approach to this moving forward that's very similar to the one that I have taken for the last 2 years in this office. And I have stood against many members of my party. I like to think that they're folks who just don't quite understand the system that we have here, and they'll come around when we help educate them. But I have stood on the floor and elsewhere and explained just exactly why our communities feel so strongly about this. But I'll say it's a lot of work, not on the House floor. That's where some of the public debate happens. But it's a lot of work every other day, every hour of the day in the building with colleagues, building relationships with colleagues in the majority, in the minority, with colleagues from here and also from the Northeast Kingdom who sort of understand the system we're in, with colleagues from Chittenden County who have no idea what the system looks like and why it's so important to us. It's about building those relationships, helping people understand, trying to make sure that the legislation as it's introduced, as it makes its way through the committee process, isn't going to be harmful for our communities. And then, yes, if harmful legislation comes to the floor, then taking a stand against it.
Mike, obviously, since this is not just a topic locally, but all in Vermont, but how would you work with your legislators from outside our region to better understand and appreciate our local system?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of this already. It's a topic on my mind all the time when I'm in the State House, is how do I help? Because, and again, I think this is a place where my perspective as somebody who didn't grow up in this can be helpful, is sort of, somebody who had to learn what this was all about, helping others learn that as well. I find that my colleagues in the legislature don't come to this with the intention of harming a community or shutting down opportunities for kids, right? They might have all kinds of different things that contribute to their perspective on this conversation, and often they don't understand exactly what's going on the ground here. So, bringing people along, inviting colleagues to come visit our schools here to really start to understand, not only to see the incredible opportunities that exist here and the communities that are built in these schools, but also to drive around the 9 towns in the Taconic and Green school district and not pass any public high schools because none of those towns operate a public high, so to really start to understand what it means to be in this rural area that these schools are serving. And I'll continue to take that same tactic, yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sandy. I'm curious, and I think it might be actually a useful anecdote for everyone to hear. 2 years ago, when some of the legislation that Oliver referenced was passed, there was a group of educators who went up to Montpelier to try to meet with folks, meet with legislators, and explain our system. And I had one conversation that was really striking, and I'm curious, both Mike and Sandy, to maybe respond to it, but it was a coffee hour and a co-sponsor on a bill that would have, for all intents, have destroyed long trail as we know as a school access for kids on school choice. And I went up to this legislator and I said, hey, I'm from Long Trail School, and I want to tell you a little bit about our school and hear your position. And he said back to me, he said, well, if the independent schools didn't exist, those kids could just go to a public school. And I said, well, so our area doesn't serve, we don't have any public schools. They're not operating districts. They come to Long Trail, they come to Warren Burton, they go to Stratton Mountain School. Some of them will choose other schools, but all of them, for the overwhelming majority, are served by an independent school. He said, well, so then they just go to a public school. And I picked my jaw off the floor, and this was someone who was a co-signer of this bill of H 483. And I don't actually think it wasn't malice, it was true lack of understanding. And I think one of the things that I think about often is, given all the things that you need to balance, given all the topics and the different areas of the state that have different top priorities, how do you get through to those folks? How do you understand that they're taking away opportunity from kids, from all of our kids? And I'd be curious to hear either of you on that.
Well, again, it goes back to the education of, you know, as much as some people have been in the state for a long time, some people have never been out of Chittenden County. So they don't know what the southern part of the state is or where it exists, or, so I think that is also one of the problems with the legislature, is that we have so many people representing the larger parts of the state, and then the rest of us are forgotten. So, pretty naive to think that not only do we not have a public school, but if we did have to go to public school, some of us would be traveling over mountains to get there. So, again, I guess education and letting them know that there are none. I mean, we're talking probably 45 miles to go to a local. I mean, there's Arlington, but they can't take all of us. And the Londonderry kids would have to go back to Chester or Leland Gray. That's not a great road to go in the wintertime. So again, they're more worried about what's happening in their own little communities and not looking at what's happening for the best of the students. And unfortunately, that's where the number one priority should be, is our students and not dollars that might be saved.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it comes back to that education piece. You know, maps can help. You know, literally trying to, you know, help people understand the space that we're talking about with non-operating towns, sending towns, and then also just sort of following that up with really highlighting just exactly what's going on inside these schools and you know, the opportunities that they're providing for kids in rural Vermont, which is really important.
Do you feel like there's open-mindedness on that other side in those conversations that you've had with folks from Chittenden County or places in the state that don't have school choice?
Yeah, I do. You know, I've had really great conversations with colleagues who you know, admit to not understanding how the system works here. You know, does that always mean that they're going to come along with me on the vote? Not necessarily, but I like to think that, you know, chipping away at those misunderstandings or misconceptions, you know, like I said before, building those relationships so that, you know, you build a relationship of trust with a colleague, and then they might be a little more likely to see it your way, to see it our community's way, and to stand with you, whether it's, you know, literally taking a vote on the floor, or just in the, you know, as bills are making their way through the process, you know, whether they're going to sort of come to the floor for a vote or not, stand with you and say, well, maybe this doesn't have to be a priority. Maybe we should let these towns continue to do something that seems not to be broken, continue to work the way they are.
Thank you. Independent schools in our area, particularly Long Trail and Burn Academy, are providing exceptional opportunities to students without any capital investment from taxpayers. Vermont's public schools require a staggering $6 billion in capital improvements that would need to be funded by the taxpayers. Yet some argue that school districts should stop sending students to independent schools and only send them to designated public schools, as we've talked about. What would you say to those who want to remove access to these independent schools?
I think I would continue to say a lot of the same, you know, and also, you know, okay, then build us a state-of-the-art public high school at no cost to local taxpayers. You know, it's an absurd notion, right? To take a system where small rural towns are served incredibly well by two and more, but you know, speaking of BBA and Long Trail, two schools right here in our community that don't require that huge investment of capital that a new high school would, and you know, to say for sort of because of reasons of a misunderstanding or ideological reasons to say, you know, end that system is just obviously an absurd notion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to add that our money is going to education and not for infrastructure, but our money is being sent to them to use for infrastructure, so they've been lucky for the last few years because we really built their schools and not just their education system. So we would they would have to start paying for us to have infrastructure, which would be extremely expensive. So they've been lucky.
Yeah, I know in the room there's some colleagues, I know, from Burton and Stratton Mountain School, and I think one of the things that often gets buried in this conversation is just, it is one of the best deals going. That thanks to generosity and philanthropy, that schools are able to build incredible facilities. I mean, we're sitting in a theater thanks to people who understood the importance of this system and committed to supporting it. And I think that is an easy talking point that I hear often, that, well, it'll be cheaper if we get rid of independent, or as Oliver said, private schools. But it takes a little time to break through a little more nuanced understanding, and that's where, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's where my frustration lies, is that I think, how do we actually, in a coherent, digestible way, give that message to people who are outside of here? Yeah, Oliver, I don't know if you press the, here you go.
No, I was going to follow up with a different. I was going to follow up with a different question, so I'll let you finish.
Go ahead.
So one of the challenges that we've had in the House, and looking forward, is this region has, as Mike alluded to, the real work of the legislature is done in committee, and it's not done on on the floor of the House. Where our community is really struggling right now is we have no representation on the House Education Committee. So that the current composition of the House Education Committee is such that there are a lot of voices from Chittenden County and voices of folks who have pretty shall we say, direct views about school choice. Mike, would you say that's a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's a great word.
And the question, I guess, I'd ask both of you is, as you're thinking about your preferences for a committee assignment next year, how would the House Education Committee rank as an option for you to consider? Is that something you'd be interested in serving on?
I definitely would be interested in serving in that. I have a good friendship with Brian Callamore, who is the Senate leader of the Education Committee. I think that it'd be tough to break into that committee since you get assigned by the leader. And I think they're pretty cautious as to where they put the people that they think might do the most damage. I have no problem putting that forth, that I would love to be on that committee.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to serve on the Education Committee. It's not obviously my sort of professional background, which has served me well on the Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee for the last 2 years, but obviously a really important place to be for our community. I did see Rob Hunter in the back of the room, so, just when we're talking about people who might be in Montpelier next year with some extensive background in this topic, he might be the best fit.
I would just add that my background and how I got involved in local politics was I got involved with the parent group immediately after my son started kindergarten at Dorset School, and then I got into the Dorset School Board. And I was on the school board when Act 60 came along. And we were the North Shire was the only region in the state that voted and unanimously no, we did not want Act 60. And it was devastating to our schools at the time because we had to make a lot of cuts. So I can feel the pain of what schools go through when stuff comes around. And again, we weren't listened to. And the northern half of the state prevailed. So definitely, I'm not afraid to go up there and rattle cages.
I'm curious, all of us in this room, I think, know the importance of school choice. You mentioned the real estate value, Sandy, but really the economic engine that it is. And I would say personally, as an educator and someone here, I have a vested interest in ensuring our system continues because we serve kids with incredible socioeconomic diversity, like unparalleled. socioeconomic diversity, and I know it's the same with our other independent schools. But then also, you know, as a father with 3 young kids, you know, for us, this education, without a doubt, is the top priority. Without a doubt, as a voter, as you know, my wife works here, our kids go to school here, we work here, we want to be here for a long, long time. And I'm wondering for both of you where it falls on your legislative priority list, particularly when it comes to school choice, because obviously I think everyone values education deeply, but our unique system and that 93% that Hannah referenced, I mean, 93% of people can't agree the sky is blue. That's incredible. And so I know for me it's a top issue. I'm curious where on your priorities, and I know there are many, but where it falls.
Well, it's pretty close to the top, right next to affordability and taxation. So yes, I definitely, it would be devastating if we lost the Long Trail at Warburton. I just can't imagine what school would be like for our students. And I think we provide great educational opportunities in our district, both at the elementary level all the way through. And to think that that would be shaken up because somebody doesn't like our choice would be awful.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I would be hard pressed to think of a day a day that we were in session over the last 2 years that I didn't have some conversation related to this topic, whether it was pulling a colleague aside in the hallway or popping into the House Education Committee to keep track of testimony on a relevant bill, or gathering with, you know, colleagues from this part of the state and from the Northeast Kingdom to talk about, you know, strategy for how we're going to approach something together. And so, you know, when you consider that so much of the work in the building is done in the committee room, and that's such a focus, you know, whatever committee you're on is such a focus for you, and then you're dealing with the bills that are coming before you on the floor in any given day, for another topic to emerge as a priority is unique, and but it's been what has been required of the representative for this district on this topic, and I don't see that changing. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I just want to, you know, we have a Democratic and a Republican, you know, candidate here, and you know, I'm sensing real alignment in terms of the support for the system that we have for school choice, and that's from my experience just in Montpelier, and I see a number of legislators and former legislators here from, you know, both Republicans and Democrats. Is, you know, this is not a partisan issue, right? This is an issue in our community and up in the kingdom, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a progressive, an independent, that everybody, generally speaking, is very supportive of. And it's when you start getting outside of our region that, you know, that's when sort of that cohesiveness, you know, really breaks down.
Thinking about that, there are several organizations such as Education Equity Alliance, which is paid for by the Vermont NEA, VSBA, VSA, and VPA that have committed significant resources towards fighting against school choice in Vermont, including communications advocating public dollars for public schools. How would you respond to this messaging and pressure those organizations?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important to say clearly, I am a public school champion too. You know, I think the public schools in our own community, public schools in general, are crucially important. I'm a product of public schools from kindergarten through college. So I think it's not helpful to make this sort of the war of public schools versus independent schools. We know here that public schools and independent schools all serve, you know, on the K through 12 journey, all serve our kids and serve our families. You know, it is unfortunate some of the rhetoric and some of the sort of strategies that have been deployed, I think, by the organizations that, and particularly the collective organization that you mentioned. You know, I think you take it on like any other interested party in the building, right? You make sure they know where you stand. You make sure they know why, and also you don't. You know, there are lots of things that, you know, whether it's the Vermont NEA or any of the other organizations that we can work together on, that we, can be, that we can be allied on. I think it's worth noting that the teachers at BBA are members of the Vermont NEA, so these things that are overlapping, right, and not always pitted against each other. And the more I think we accept the nuances of that reality and try to forge a path forward that, keeps our community's best interests in mind, the better off we'll be.
I think, first of all, I'm not endorsed by any of those. I think they have a very powerful thumb on the legislature, and I think that at some point they're afraid to cross that line and face them head on. And I think that, sometimes you gotta be a little bit more braver and stand up and say, you know what, enough's enough, and we're not going to take it any longer, and stand up to some of those unions.
So I just a few thoughts about some of these organizations, because there is a collective, and then there's quite a bit of AstroTurf type organizations out there. It's hard to keep track of them all. They all have very similar sounding names. But one of the things that it has been really frustrating is that some of these organizations are sort of couching this as they're defending public education, and that there's an assault, there's an attack on public education. And the reality is nothing could be further from the truth. And as I look at our region, look at the Northeast Kingdom, there's a true partnership between our public education system, our independent schools. We have educators who have worked in both environments. We have public school educators who are sending their kids to independent schools. I mean, we have a really well-functioning system where everybody's working together to serve our kids, right? And we need to keep in mind that's the most important thing: serving our kids, educating our kids. And it's really unfortunate. It's really frustrating to see this narrative that's being pushed that somehow the public schools are under attack. The reality is that's just nothing could be further from the truth. Nobody's up in Montpelier advocating tearing down public schools, charter schools. That just does not exist. It's a fiction that is being perpetuated by these organizations. Ironically, to sort of attack and undermine independent schools and access to independent schools.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, because one of the things I was incredibly proud of last year, Burton, Long Trail School, and the BRSU put out a statement of unity about how we are all supporting all of our kids locally, and we're committed to that. And what an incredible opportunity we have that children and families can find a school that works for them. There's not a competition between us locally. And where I've found frustration, echoing what Oliver said, is that I'm also a proud product of K-12 public education, and their children go to Dorset School and are having a wonderful experience. We have great schools. But what's challenging is people who aren't here are really resorting to, I would say, misleading and insidious tactics. Like the tagline of public dollars for public schools is misleading at best. But there have also been other communication attempts that are really like the same organization had put out, and you guys know this, a tagline that was the schools are separate but equal. That's horrifying. I mean, that's really horrifying to pull on some of the most horrific elements of our history to say that that's what we're doing in this building or up the road at Burton. And if no one pushes back on that, it's accepted as truth. I was proud, a group of independent school leaders, we wrote a forceful letter to that organization and to the Senate Education Committee, and they stopped using that tagline. But what if we didn't? And I think that's the thing that's deeply frustrating, is that all we want to do is just educate kids, run schools, and take care of all of our children. And I think speak for my colleagues that are fellow independent schools, that that's it. That's the goal. No one's trying to attack any other school. No one's trying to do anything but figure out good ways to educate kids. But the unyielding attacks from an Education Equity Alliance take away from that time and energy that could be used for that. And I know that all the school leaders are committed to pushing back on that, but I hope that whoever comes from here is like fire lit beneath them to push back on it forcefully. And I know that those organizations are very well funded and that they have a lot of power and other legislative interests. But I don't think there's a more important topic and a greater call than to really, really cut out those narratives that are false and misleading. I realize that's not really a question, sorry, but feel free to pick up any of that.
Yes.
Mike, Oliver, Sandy, Colin, thank you for answering my questions. Please, let's all give a round of applause for our panelists. We will now open the floor to our audience for questions. However, I do have some rules for us. Please raise your hand to ask one concise topic-related question. When I call on you, please stand and direct your question to the panel. We ask that you use this time for questions and avoid making statements. Due to time constraints, you will only be able to ask one question at this time. Mike, Sandy, Colin, Oliver, please feel free to answer any of the questions. Who's up? Right in front.
Hi, I'm a teacher here at Long Trail, and I am probably the only one who's slow on this. It's usually the case. But I wonder if we could talk about, or you could tell me, what exactly is on the table here with this legislation? Money, of course, okay? So it's the allocation of money somewhere. What do each of you think is your core position on this, Sandy and Mike? What is your core belief about the way you think the world should look? And then what does the world look like if your point of view wins the day in the state legislature? What does the Vermont school system look like 1 year from now if your point of view wins? How are we operating?
Well, I guess I would say that there are a lot of huge issues to tackle in the Vermont education system, right? We have, obviously, we're having a lot of conversations right now about education finance, about the way we pay for our schools, about so many different things. Not to mention, there's a lot to talk about to make sure that what's going on in schools is what needs to be going, that our kids are learning the best they can, that the opportunities are being made available across the board. So my preference would be for this issue to be, behind us. For people to say, what's working in your community is working in your community. We're gonna stop, coming in from outside and trying to stop something from happening that 91% of your community just said, please don't stop this from happening. So, I think you asked, what's on the table with this legislation. There's no legislation yet. Every biennium is a fresh start. Surely we will know what is on the table, pretty quickly when bills start to get introduced. Bills that we don't love from this community's perspective start to get introduced that would start to limit the opportunities for our kids here. But if I was looking at a perfect world, we would be talking about all of the other major topics in education and in education finance, and we wouldn't be talking about 5% of Vermont's kids and the schools that they get to go to and the opportunities that are provided for them here in our southwestern Vermont community.
I would just say that it's definitely a forefront, and it's not just a Vermont issue right now, it's a nationwide issue. And I think that the public schools are scared because I think people have the opportunity to choose which schools and what they want. And world of all pictures, it would be great if it passed and that more schools like Long Trail School popped up in some of the larger areas. And that there would be more independent schools for kids to choose from and parents to decide where they want to go to their kids. I think that would be a perfect world if everybody had a choice and not having to go just to a public school if that's the only thing you have in your region. I think that again, it goes back to the dollars that those organizations have to fight and back the money against the fighting of that, and not allowing or supporting those organizations that are against the school choice. So in a perfect world, it would be everybody would have that choice, and everybody would flourish immensely because they'd have what was best for them.
Any other questions? In the back?
Yes, I'm Maria. I want to piggyback on what Mr. Matt said, and I'm blessed to be a long-term sub here at Long Trail as well. But I had a question for the panel, and I also agree. Well, I want to sort of question. Thank you for your answer on what Mr. Matt said. Matt, you said in a perfect world, right? And Sandy, about everyone having a choice. I have 2 special needs boys in town. I've been here for over 3.5 years, and I've been an educator in the surrounding towns. So what does a perfect world look like for you, or in your eyes, for the special needs children, and them having choice? And what about if we're not in our open choice towns? What does that perfect world look like for our special needs children? And I know that's a bit controversial, right? But that perfect world for all of our children. And I'm not just looking for my 2 children that are special needs, but the children that are coming up after my children. My concern is not just my children. I'm looking at all our children. It was 1 in 50. It was 1 in 80, 1 in 50, now it's 1 in 32. My children will come and go in our school system. And as an educator, a true educator, I'm looking at all our children coming after my children. So what does that perfect world look like for the special needs children, and that school choice look like for the special needs children after my children? What does that perfect world look like in your eyes for them as well?
So before Mike and Sandy get onto the perfect world, I want to describe for you what today's world looks like as a parent of a child with special needs. And as somebody who is involved in the implementation of Act 173, which is a piece of legislation that passed several years ago that brought about rulemaking at the State Board of Education. At the time I was the chair when we completed that rulemaking. And the long and short of it is that Vermont independent schools are required to accept students with special education needs, regardless of what. And there's a whole process that's laid out to ensure that those students are admitted on a non-discriminatory basis. In fact, there can't be any questions in the application materials that would speak to a child's special education needs. That admissions process is completely blind to any of those factors whatsoever. And that the school, as a condition of accepting any student, is required to accept a student with special education needs and to work with the local LEA on how that student's needs are going to best be met. So that's today's world.
I think in a perfect world that those students should have the opportunity like everybody else and be able to go to the school that fits their needs. And if it means that you have to take them someplace out of your district, then that's what we have to do. But those kids are entitled to get the best education that's available and have the same opportunities that everybody else has.
Yeah, I mean, I think every kid deserves to have the best possible education, regardless of any particular circumstances for any particular child. So what Oliver described sounds like a fairly comprehensive attempt at getting it right, and also there are always unintended consequences and issues that crop up, and so I think it's really crucial to listen in the process, to listen to people like you, to listen to people like Oliver, parents of kids with special needs, to hear what's working, what's not working, what we need to fix, and to move forward with all those things in mind.
Thank you. Yes.
Catherine McLaughlin, I'm on the board here, and hopefully I'm a Longtrail graduate and hopefully future parent, assuming my kids stay out of trouble. Could you guys explain for the group the difference between vouchers and town tuition, the disingenuous reasons that other outsiders are trying to conflate those terms, and how, because of the town tuitioning model we have, a school like Longtrail, and I'm assuming BVA as well, can serve lower and middle class students at a much higher percentage given the amount of scholarship dollars now available and sort of the economics of it? Because that 1% goes to private school narrative is not what's happening.
So I'll pick up the voucher one and leave the other ones to the rest of the group here. But because the voucher one is really frustrating, right? So Vermont, we do not have a voucher system in Vermont. Let's be clear about that. And that is a term that is used because it imports the national context into Vermont. A voucher system, when you're speaking to folks who are familiar with systems out of state, Florida, Arizona, etc., a true voucher system is one where a school district is operating a public school, and in addition to operating the public school, offers families a quote-unquote voucher for some nominal amount of money, typically not much, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 that they can then use to go to another school. And it subsidizes part of the tuition of the other school, and the family pays the difference. The argument against such a system is that the only families who can truly avail themselves of that are those with means, and they're effectively getting a tuition discount, and it's siphoning money away from the local public school, right? And that's the big sort of national fear that's out there, right? We don't have that in Vermont because, quite simply, a community makes a choice as to whether it's going to operate a public school for certain grades, or if it does not, then it offers tuition, which is close to or at the true cost of education. So that's the distinction. And when people are talking about vouchers here in Vermont, we don't have vouchers, and it's certainly disingenuous to suggest that we do.
And I can speak to the socioeconomic access. And disingenuous, I think, is the right word. Oliver mentioned private schools, the connotation being that we're elitist institutions. Vouchers has a similar negative connotation that plays into this national conversation. That's just not the reality here. The reality here at Longtrail, 73% of our students attend Longtrail thanks to town tuition. So our socioeconomic diversity is a real point of strength and a real point of pride. And I say this all the time, the tragic irony is that folks who are painting schools like Longtrail as elitist institutions, by removing school choice, hurt the exact students they're claiming to protect. Because if you no longer have access using town tuition to a Longtrail, then you can only attend Longtrail if you can pay for Longtrail out of your pocket. And that's a very select few, and it's not just an intellectual exercise. You can look around the country. There's 48 other states that have that model, and by and large, those private schools are for folks who can pay, or a select few who can earn scholarships for some great talent that they may have. And that's not the case here. And also, too, and a testament to our community, is that folks, all of us, vote on the tuition and approve the tuition for Burton, Longtrail, Stratton Mountain School for students to attend using their town tuition. So there's accountability there. And there's also, in our philanthropic efforts, at least the past 3 years, every single dollar that we've raised in our annual fund, every single dollar can go directly to financial aid to increase access and affordability for students. And that's including the 73% that are already coming with town tuition. So that's something that I'm really proud of, our whole community is really proud of, and we should all feel proud that we value education to that degree here. But again, it takes a little understanding. It's not as easy to understand as just a private school being elitist.
Right here.
I'm a parent and I live in Mendon. There's a lot of my neighbors who wanted to come but couldn't get away from soccer games or whatever. We want to know what we can do. And that may be bigger than just this panel, but what can we do to kind of get ahead of the ball instead of just getting panicked every time we see something in the newspaper?
Well, I know from experience as a town clerk, the more that show up at that building in Montpelier on any given day when the topic comes up and you fill those quarters with people that want to advocate for it, then that's when they start to listen. And I think that the more people that go up there, the stronger the voice. And that might be something that we need to think about as a community, and both here and Burn parents.
Yeah, I'll say Burn parents and Long Trail parents have not been quiet over the last 2 years. They have filled you have filled my inbox and the inboxes of a lot of my colleagues, and that is helpful. I mean, you have all heard where I stand on this, but certainly it helps me as the representative for this community in discussion with my colleagues when I have the voices of families who would be impacted by a change to this system behind me. I'll also say, I think that when you're communicating, because certainly you're always free to communicate not just with your representative, but with any representative in Vermont, with the members of the relevant committees in the House and the Senate. When you're communicating, I think it's really helpful, rather than communicating with anger or fear, though those things certainly might be present, to communicate just how powerful these school communities are, and just how powerful the opportunities that your kids have are, thanks to these schools and thanks to the unique, sometimes hard to understand to those who aren't in it, system that we have. Those stories about how these schools serve our kids, about how they're not, elitist, how they're not the boogeyman, how they're really serving our communities, are the ones that can really, I think, get across and help people from other parts of the state who might be on the relevant committees or in positions of decision-making power to start to understand what these schools and what this system means to us.
I'll add a couple tangible things. One, things like this are important, right? And thank you all for being here. We're also really fortunate, and I see a lot of people in the room, that our local reps really understand this issue and are advocating on our behalf. The challenge, as we said, is that the folks that it doesn't impact daily. And so I hope whoever it is and all our other legislators continue to have that fire lit to go and work on it day in and day out in the State House to build those relationships. I also think for all of us who have friends or colleagues or neighbors around the state that aren't in our area, to have them speak with their representatives. And I'd like anyone to Long Trail any day of the week, any of those legislators, anyone who co-signed those bills that would have destroyed a Long Trail school, come visit, come walk the halls. It's a genuine offer. And I think the more we can spread around the state of Vermont to areas that are not school choice, to invite them down to understand that it's not a boogeyman and really get a little bit more depth when it's not a moment of panic, right, I think is really powerful. So I'd encourage you to do that, to spread the word and to stay engaged. And then just, the last thing that I would encourage too is that for students, and we've tried at Long Trail to do this, but to tell their stories and to capture those are powerful, right? It's not, they're real kids at stake here, right? Our children. It's not theoretical. And so I think, the urgency that our legislators, our local legislators have, pressing that in a healthy, productive way to other people to have them understand is really, really important.
Yeah.
And just to echo, Sandy and Mike, both make really valid points that, showing up and being visible in the State House really does make a difference. Some other opportunities out there. One, we're starting to see, some organized efforts. And again, the opposition out there is very well funded. I mean, huge amounts of money. And then, there are some of these AstroTurf organizations that have surfaced over the last year or so. And they're starting to generate content in the form of op-eds, commentaries, letters to the editor, and also, testimony that's submitted to committees in the legislature. There's this commission on the future of education in Vermont, which I happen to serve on. And I can tell you right now that the opponents are there at every meeting. They are there and they are testifying during public comment and basically, demanding that, action be taken that would be adverse to the interests of our community. So getting involved and engaged in those opportunities going forward is going to be really important.
Hi, I'm Meredith Morgan. I've been on the school board up in Middletown Springs for about 15 years. Watched a lot of ebb and flow over the years with this whole choice issue. And the Macon decision 2 years ago caused what I think is the root problem of this. And Oliver, you alluded to some of this on the edge. And I'm wondering how our independent schools in this area can divorce themselves from basically the public money that's going to religious schools. Maybe schools that aren't meeting district quality standards or aren't meeting approved independent school standards and aren't meeting standards for hiring educators. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kick things off, and I think Oliver, you probably have some things to say about this. I'll say, that 91% number has been cited a couple of times. 91% of our community voted town meeting day to say, please don't change our system. This is working for our families, working for our kids. On that same vote, 91% said, and also, we don't want public dollars going to schools that discriminate on the basis of any protected status, right? And that's really important because we'll never win the fight for independent schools and school choice in this region if we're constantly having to have the conversation about sending, dollars to schools that are openly discriminating against students' families, discriminating in their hiring practices for teachers or staff. So I don't have the answer to this tonight, but I'll just say it's certainly on my mind. It's always part of when I'm trying to thread the needle of how to get this policy right and how to make sure that we protect for the long term this system for our communities. It's got to be a part of it, for sure.
I would just say I agree that I don't think that you can discriminate on any reason. A pupil's a pupil, and education is important. And there's so much more than just the 4 schools that survived the big talk, and that would just be, it's just awful that they would even consider that. And it's all inclusive. In an age where we're trying to be inclusive, why would we discriminate on something like that?
So I want to touch on the Macon decision because you're absolutely right. That the Macon decision has touched off a lot of the legislation that we've seen. But again, I don't, things weren't, picture perfect pre-Macon, right? This has been, for decades now, there have been attempts to take this system away from us. Macon just became something, became a focal point, right? And really, brought the energy to the table, significant energy. And, so there's a few issues with Macon. And for those of you who don't know, Macon was a Supreme Court decision, federal Supreme Court decision that essentially said, if you're going to provide public money to any non-public school, you cannot exclude religious schools from the mix, right? It's that simple, right? So that creates problems in Vermont because Vermont has a long-standing history of not providing funding for religious schools. And there are a lot of people have, various points of view about that, but generally speaking, a lot of Vermonters are uncomfortable with money going to religious schools. That's one issue. The other issue is that there are some religious schools, and I wouldn't say all religious schools, but certainly some religious schools out there that quite frankly have some really abhorrent practices, blatant discriminatory practices in their admissions criteria and their hiring and their operating practices that really don't reflect well on schools in general, and particularly Vermont's independent schools. And just to be super clear, the independent school community in Vermont, through its association, wants nothing to do with these schools. They are viewed as kind of pariahs out there. They're in the distinct minority. There's only a small handful of these bad actors out there, and I will say that they're bad actors because they're going to bring down the whole system if they keep doing what they're doing and sort of provoking, various, efforts out there. So it's a real problem, but again, it's disingenuous. On the other side of the fence, they're sort of cheering this on because they are sort of bundling all of Vermont's independent schools in with these bad actors, and the same way that there have been over time, you read about in the press, there are public schools out there that have had blatantly offensive racist mascots, right? No school is perfect. Every school, every system has its challenges, but it's unfair to sort of label everybody and tar and feather everybody with the same brush. So I think we need to be really clear about, the fact that by and large, independent schools of Vermont, are not part of that problem and very much stand firmly behind, these principles of non-discriminatory admissions and hiring practices.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too redundant, but I think it's really important. Oliver mentioned the Vermont Independent School Association, and Mark Tashton and I are both on the executive committee of the Vermont Independent School Association. Oliver's a consultant for that group. We say really clearly in our values and in the bylaws and in that no school that discriminates is allowed to be part of visa, period. Also, none of those schools that we referenced or that advocate are part of visa, period. So we're trying to distance it to your question, trying to create really clear, tangible distance. And then I would also say, of course, that discrimination in all forms is wrong. And whatever the school, we should be laser focused on cutting that out. And what's challenging and disingenuous is that really important issue of making sure schools are inclusive and not discriminating, it quickly gets conflated to attacking independent schools, and that's wrong. And so to say we should be laser focused on the real issues that we want to solve. And many of you in the room probably know, we were 2 years ago. Long Trail School was in the middle of on the front page of every national publication for this exact issue, and the community that is being targeted by some of these schools, Oliver said bad actors, and I would agree, is the LGBTQ community. And I'm proud of how our school responded. I'm proud of the stories and experiences that our students have, all of our students, but particularly students who found a safe haven that are part of that LGBTQ community in the school. And again, it would be a tragedy if those students didn't have access to it. So and I know can speak for my colleagues, adamantly opposed to any discrimination. And I also want to recognize that the actual students who are walking the halls are finding places where they can be themselves, where they can be safe, where they can be educated, they can become their best version of themselves. And we can't lose sight of that because there are some bad actors. Let's focus on that. Let's focus on those bad actors, and I'm with you. The first to stand up, trust me. I'll be the first to go right at that. But those are two different issues.
Thank you. My new friend in the front.
My name's Susan Olshoff. I'm a grandmother of a 7th grader here, and I'm new to this topic, so forgive me if this question is obvious. But what confuses me is, it seems with all the communities that don't have high schools or middle schools, the independent schools being in our neck of the woods is the answer that we need to be able to educate children in that area. So those who want to destroy or undermine this whole process of independent schools, are they talking more about the kids in other towns who have high schools who are still choosing and paying to come to an independent school like Long Trail? Or do they mush it all up into the same kettle of fish so that independent school is bad in their mind and they want out, and yet they're not really coming up with solutions for where to educate the thousands of children who live in towns without high schools? That's what's confusing me right now.
So to be clear, these entities generally have no problem with people paying out of pocket to go to an independent school. Nobody's proposing abolishing independent schools. What they do want to abolish is public tuition being paid for those students, which has a direct impact on those communities like ours that don't operate a public school.
And yeah, we shouldn't bury the lead. You're right. There is no public option for these students to attend. And that's a really important headline that we should make sure that in Montpelier, for those who aren't in sending districts, understand.
We have time for one more question, right here in the front.
Hi. Communication came up numerous times during tonight's conversation. What are some of the panelists' ideas about communicating to those to win over hearts and minds on the other side?
I think it begins with educating them. I think if it takes one-on-one and you have to sit down with them and explain to them what we have and how it works and what we've had for over 100 years here in our community. We've never had a public school for a secondary high school. This is what we've always had, and I think that you just have to educate them, and if it means you have to keep going over and over and over again, one or two at a time, and just telling them this is, come visit us, like you said, see what we have. This is how it works. This is what we have. I don't understand if they saw it. Maybe there's, I hate to think, really low is maybe they just are jealous. I don't want to say jealous, but they don't have the opportunities that we have, so therefore they don't like what we have. I guess is a better way of saying that, but I think they just don't understand the whole concept, and again, they don't understand the geographics that we have in our geography of the layout, and I think you just have to keep going over and over and over again until you can convince them one at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I think education, I think it's, personal stories, I think, for folks to hear, and not necessarily folks you said on the other side, but I think there are a lot of people who are maybe on the other side because they, like we've said all night, they just don't understand the system, they don't know how it works. So I think hearing the stories of students who come to these schools, hearing the stories of families, I do think, Sandy mentioned earlier hearing folks come into the town clerk and say, one student is going to go to the PDA and one to Long Trail. I think those can be very powerful stories about how the system works and how it serves different kids in different ways. And then I think also, asking for alternative solutions. You were mentioning that you were a little confused because it doesn't seem like there's, another solution for kids. 9 towns in the T&G district, no public high school. It's spread over 4 counties, many miles, many mountains. Asking sort of for hypothetical, I think sometimes, what's the other solution for our community? Where should these kids go if they didn't come to these schools that really have, in the case of BBA, we talk about it all the time, the public education system has really essentially grown up around VBA. It's not a coincidence that there's not a public high school in Manchester. It's just the way the system has grown up and co-evolved. And I think all of those points, just helping people understand that this isn't good versus bad or black and white, that there's nuance here, that there's years of history, that there's all of these factors that come into play, and that at the end of the day, if our priority is to make sure that our kids are having excellent educational opportunities provided for them, then that's what's happening here.
One last question in the back. No, left. Yep. Yes, here.
I'm Charlie Rockwell, and I am co-chair of the Rupert Select Board, a town that is revitalizing because I think of school choice. But this may seem like a very basic question, but after everything that we've talked about, we've got these polarized sides. How would you define what the singular problem is that we're trying to solve? And while that may sound simple, I think it may be somewhat complex.
I'll give Mike and Sandy time to think about their answers, because that's probably who you want to hear from.
Yeah, the question of school choice.
For me, I say this all the time, it's a solution in search of a problem. Because if you look around the country, education, and particularly in rural areas, we're not seeing the outcomes that I think we all want. And we are an anomaly in that our kids have incredible schools here. And so I'm just asking, I don't think it's a problem. I think we have a great system, and we need to protect it and defend it. And we're kind of asking, let us run the school and give these kids the opportunity to be educated and educated well. But you really want to hear from Mike and Sandy.
So generous. I do think that actually your question is a perfect example, because we say it all the time too, solution in search of a problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve here? Is a question that we ask of colleagues who are, who put forward some of the legislation that would be most damaging to our school communities. What is the problem we're trying to solve here? If it's a problem of ensuring that public dollars aren't going to schools that discriminate, let's do that. Let's fix that problem. But let's not take whole communities and opportunities for the kids there along with it, right? There's got to be a more nuanced way to approach that problem, if that's the problem we believe is actually present.
And I'll go back to the dollar issue. I think that both Long Trail and Burbank have been very good at keeping the tuition rate where it is at, and sometimes some of those other public schools are spending a lot more per pupil than what we're paying tuition for at our school choices. So again, I think we have to educate them. We have to educate the students no matter where we send them or where they go to school. And if we're spending less money than some of our public schools are, then that should be a given that we're doing the right thing, and that we're using our tax dollars. And it's our people, it's our tax dollars. If this is what we choose to do with our tax dollars, why should somebody else in another community say you can't spend your tax dollars that way? It's I don't know how much we're simple to make it. I don't get the literal that you can't spend your dollars. We give a lot of dollars in our community to other schools, and if we want to spend X amount of dollars because we want the best for our students here, then that should be our prerogative.
So just to tack on what Colin was saying about this really being a solution in search of a problem. And I go back to the Macon decision, and there was all this consternation in the legislature, and the one bill that passed out of the House and went over to the Senate and died in the Senate Education Committee actually didn't solve for Macon. So there was all this furor about Macon, but what actually was done had nothing to do with Macon. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So a few other points. One, you look at kids at Long Trail, you look at kids at Burton. Nobody's at Long Trail doesn't want to be at Long Trail. Nobody's at Burton. No kids at Burton
who doesn't want to be at Burton, right? We've got $6 billion with a B dollars worth of deferred maintenance and capital construction needs in our public school system, right? That's where we should be having a conversation. That's where we should be spending our time. We have some real challenges in the public school system. And there is an inordinate amount of time focused on searching for solutions to a problem that doesn't exist, or in the case of Macon, where unfortunately, because of this unfortunate Supreme Court decision, our hands are tied, which is why the bill that did pass out of the House actually had nothing to do with Macon. It was a sort of a redirect into doing something different.
Last question.
Scott McChesney of Paul, and I was on the merger committee for Paul and Rupert for Act 46. And this is a great discussion. Thanks for all your time. The thought came to me, this kind of global, like how does this, all of Vermont looking at just us little 5% here. And obviously one really important aspect is tax dollars. How much is it going to cost? And as you say, it's probably more costly to eliminate this and then have to build a school. But I think the other really big point that is often discussed in Vermont is the problem with young families leaving and the populations in the schools going down. And I'm curious, how many schools are the populations going up? And in how many communities? Perhaps maybe 5 or less in the whole state of Vermont would be my guess. And I wonder how many of those are the communities with school choice. So maybe that, could that be an important argument, maybe to look at those stats and make that argument. I mean, we're trying to come up with ways to attract young families into the state. Maybe education on a more global way in Vermont would be a way to do that. It's working here.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I mean, is that, sorry, is that something that you've thought of or that you've talked to people up in Montpelier about? Because it just seems like the tax dollar piece and the population piece.
Yes.
Yeah, with not having any of the numbers you just asked for in front of me, I'll just say that certainly anecdotally it's something that is part of the conversation. Just how many people we hear from who are here because of these schools and because of the system. Young families with young kids who have moved here from elsewhere, for this reason. So it's definitely part of the conversation, even without the stats coming to it. Oliver might have those stats.
5 was a pretty good number, actually. Certainly up in Chittenden County, there are some schools that are growing, but across the state, we're seeing drops, across the system. And I would point out that independent schools are not immune to that. Okay? I looked at some of this data a few months ago, and over the last 20 or 30 years, we actually have fewer independent schools today than we did 20 years ago. And there has been an overall decline. Nevertheless, there are some schools that have higher numbers for sure, but overall, the macro trends are actually quite similar. And that is, Vermont's an aging state, and outside of the sort of urban center of Chittenden County, we continue to see declines. But I know locally here, the numbers that I've looked at for both Burger and Long Trail over the last, 10 years are tell a different story.
Yeah, I can speak to our enrollment numbers here. We're at record high enrollment. We educate 257 kids, grades 6 through 12. 10 years ago, we educated, Katie ran into the back, I would say about 100. Yeah, 80. So I'm proud of the experience our students have here. And one of the nice parts about accountability is that if we're not doing a good job, there's other places we can go. And I think on a personal note, when my wife and I were contemplating moving here, we have 3 young kids. The single thing we asked was, where are they going to go to school? and to have the confidence to her, and she, works at a small business here in Manchester. Kids are here, we hope to be here forever. And in our families and friends, and some of them are here tonight, who have similar situation, children, kindergarten, first, second grade. It's the thing that tethers people here, particularly with the increase of remote work. And so I think it's an opportunity, and there's also real economic realities to that, that we all know, that I think, again, in doing our part, telling that story, because what a place to live. Let's amplify the things that are working, right? And then solve the issues, not create issues when things are actually working well.
Well, we are unfortunately all out of time. Thank you, audience, for your thoughtful questions. I thought that was very productive and definitely encourage us to continue the conversation. Could we please give one more round of applause to our panel?